going, baby? How you living? How you living?
I really like to take this challenge for myself, aside of just being a musician.
She had a swishy jacket and some thing in her head.
Even it's really big for you.
Yeah, it's like the size of me.
Don't worry, I won't say anything stupid. I hope. It's just like a crazy metal band, like shooting everything up.
My advice is forget the movies and look for a good job.
My daughter is going to sleep, so I need to say goodnight to her.
I don't want terrible things to always be happening to me and my children.
I think I was more nervous when the movie was premiering and coming out, because then I realized that people actually had to see it.
Nice to escape the studio. We have the beautiful, not sunny English countryside behind us.
This country and this world can do a whole lot better.
Wow, what a presentation.
Right, like I want people to know that you didn't just show up now.
That's where the idea of the pancake came from.
But you're the only person ever who's ever asked me that question. Ever.
Oh, wow.
There's one episode of America's history that is told very differently depending on who you are and where you live. It is the story of our Civil War and what came after.
We have not adequately understood who we are as a nation.
There's a big movement to remove Confederate history. I don't see the pain in this symbol.
I don't think that slavery and Jim Crow should be forgotten.
I'm going to disagree with a common idea that the Civil War was totally about slavery.
You don't really hear the word slavery or slaves in Mississippi. This simple term is whitewash.
In that reconciliation, the nation itself embraces the Confederacy.
All of this tension and anger comes from the erasure of African Americans' history.
We all should learn the real history because we think we know, but we don't.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Mark Sugiyama from Eclectic Arts, based here in Seattle, Washington. Thank you so much for joining me on this 15th of July, 2021. And just some real quick housekeeping things before we get to my interview this morning for me. If you'd like to know what I have coming up, and I do have things already confirmed for next week and the week after that, and a few things into August, please follow me as Eclectic Arts Media, one word, on Instagram. That's where I post everything first. And then some of that information migrates over to other social media platforms. If you're new to my YouTube channel, if you could do me a huge favor and please hit the subscribe button. That helps me out. I just hit that magical 1,000 number a couple weeks ago, and I'd love to add to that. And if you're following me, if you're watching me on the Twitch side of things, if you could follow me over there, that's great as well. That's where I started with everything with the wonderful band Alice. So I will always support what Twitch is about and what they do. And again, there's a lot of wonderful things coming up, and I just confirmed something else this morning. So I'm looking forward to doing everything. And let's get to things. It feels like it's been a minute since I've done a live stream, even though it was Friday was the last one. But my guest today is an award-winning filmmaker. Her new documentary, Civil War, or Who Do We Think We Are, is available now on Peacock. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts Virtual Studio, Miss Rachel Boynton.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I am well. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk to you about the film and all in your career and everything else that you do. So I'm fascinated with film and all that kind of thing. So I can't wait to dive into it.
Cool.
Okay. So where did the idea, like the seeds come from to start doing this film, this project?
Well, the film, I mean, for people who haven't seen it, it's about basically back in 2015, there was this massacre at a church in Charleston, South Carolina. And there was a lot of coverage after that event about the guy who perpetrated it posing with a Confederate flag. And a lot of people were questioning sort of Confederate symbols and things like that. And I heard a podcast from a woman named Diane Rehm that was about educational standards in Texas, specifically, in response to that event. And during that podcast, there was a lot of discussion about how many people in America didn't believe that the Civil War was about slavery, which I had never known. I grew up in the North, I have family from the South, but I just never knew that. And when I learned that, I thought to myself, wow, I mean, we were at a very divided moment in our history back then. It was Obama's end of his term, his last term. And I thought to myself, how in the world are we possibly going to be a united country if we're not telling the same story about our past? And I initially wanted to go to classrooms around the country and look at how the Civil War was being taught. So the original idea was to start just with the teaching piece of it. And I started in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I started shooting in January of 2016, so the last year of Obama's presidency. And we started at an all-boys school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I quickly realized that I was going to need to go outside of the classroom to see how people outside of that setting were thinking about the past and relating to the past. And so the film became a much larger project. And it's framed as a film about storytelling, about how the nation tells this story.
Okay, that's there's so many things to kind of to unpack with this, obviously, and I'm just kind of also curious, how did you pick the boys' school that you started filming at initially?
You know, a lot of things in documentaries are kind of random. I mean, it's sort of like riding the wave of reality. If you're really embracing the unknown in the way that the kind of verite film that I've normally made does. So my husband's family is from Memphis, Tennessee, and through a connection there of a guy who had gone to the school. That particular school, it's in the film, it's called the Macaulay School. It's on a Civil War battlefield site. It's actually literally physically built on a battlefield. And in Chattanooga, the history is very much alive. Like, people still have cannons in their front yards from the Civil War. So it was a very good place to begin. And at this particular school, they had a semester-long class on the Civil War and Reconstruction. So from my point of view, it was a great place to begin because it was so steeped in the history, and a semester gives you lots and lots of time to sit around and sort of disappear into the background. We way overshot that particular piece.
Okay, yeah, no, I've had the pleasure of talking to a few other documentary filmmakers, and kind of like what they planned on doing, half of it they didn't plan at all. It becomes like, who do you know? Someone mentions something, it's like, oh,
yeah,
do you mind if we come in there for a few days or a few months or whatever with our cameras and kind of capture some footage. And I think for myself, and like what you were saying earlier, it's so interesting, different people's viewpoints on things. Like, they were thinking, that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, and it's kind of like, so what did you think it was about? And that's what your film it kind of explores, some of that thinking. And I know as I was sitting on my couch watching it, it was like, really? There's really people like that? But there are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, it's really important to be insistent on truth when we're talking about this stuff. Like, we have to be insistent. The Civil War was about slavery, right? Like, I mean, if you look at the facts of the history, there are facts, and they're not really negotiable. They're facts. But in terms of what happened after the war, in order to make peace in this country, there was a fictionalizing of the history in order to bring white people together so that they could get along again. I mean, and what we're living with today are the sort of the ripple effects of the peace that was made back then, and the things that white America decided they really just weren't going to talk about anymore. And that wasn't just a Southern decision. That was a Northern decision too. And I think one of the things that was really important to me with the film was to not just make it a film about the South. I think a lot of times when people explore this subject, they focus on like wacky Southerners who you can make fun of, who believe really strongly in some lost cause myth. And while those people exist, this film is not just about those people. It's about the way in which the storytelling has infected like all of our lives, North and South, and the things that we have forgotten to see. Like, one thing that really struck me when I was making the film was, Peacock put the film out for Juneteenth. And it really struck me while I was making the film that we have national holidays, right? Lots of national holidays. But that until this year, There had been no national holiday commemorating the fact that at the end of the Civil War, 4 million people were newly free, right? Just that basic fact. Like, what a massive, amazing truth. And I mean, technically, a lot of people didn't hear about it till later. I mean, there were all sorts of problems with that. But just the basic fact that emancipation happened, right? Like, why have we not been celebrating that as a nation since the end of the war?
Yeah, no, that's an extremely valid point. And you can even add on to it, I think, a little bit that most people probably weren't aware of it until last year.
Right.
That even happened.
But I think a lot of times it's really hard for us to, it's easy for us to notice the things we see. It's really hard for us to notice the things we're not seeing, right? Like, I mean, those things are a lot harder. And so one of the big challenges of the film was in sort of delving into the things that aren't being said about our past.
Yeah, and I know for myself that one thing that it wasn't necessarily easy for me to wrap my head around, but then I did kind of maybe empathize a little bit with some of the folks that you interviewed, especially from the South, was when they're talking about that, you know, their great-grandfather fought on this battle for the South, or that we have some sort of, you know, mementos or whatever from some family member, some cousins, whatever, that I don't think about things like that.
Sure.
That's kind of like, well, this is something I read about, or I learned about in school, the way they taught me the curriculum from the 70s and the 80s, and that maybe that was an incredibly skewed curriculum, but then that just was kind of lost on me. So I'm listening to these people talk about that. From just that piece of it, I could kind of understand a little bit why they think the way they do. And I mean,
they learn these stories from their grandparents. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of this in the South in particular, a lot of this lost cause stuff is very linked to family lore and family belief and a sense of pride in your heritage, right? And so from a sort of Northern liberal point of view, when you're saying, hey guys, wake up, you're lying to yourselves, you know, we need to grapple with white supremacy in our country. For a lot of people, it's asking them to question or to deny or to call false these stories that they've been told, handed down generation to generation. And that's a tough sell. It's not to say that it shouldn't happen. It's just that the emotions run really deep, and it's going to take some time and not necessarily screaming in order to get people to recognize the truth. I mean, I think another thing that's interesting in the film is that so many people all over the country really don't want to talk about this stuff. They don't want to talk about, you know, systemic racism or the reality of white supremacy in our history. Like, it's not something that people feel comfortable with. And that's true everywhere. And that's one of the themes you see over and over and over again in all the classrooms around the country and in people's living rooms. Their general discomfort with really contemplating the reality of the past.
Yeah, very much so. And I think your film definitely shows. I really love the parts when, in particular, you're in the classroom and listening to the high school students and watching the different viewpoints of the kids. And some of them had things of just the way they're thinking at, you know, 16 through 18 years old. And maybe that thinking is going to change, or maybe it's not. But it made me as a viewer think, okay, let me try to understand where they're coming from, which has been, granted, extremely tough in the last 4 years or so, depending on what your political persuasion is. But at the same time, if you're not addressing these things, or at least trying to come to some sort of level of respect with what someone's saying, you're not going to get anywhere with it. It just stays where it's at.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the larger things I was really interested in. I mean, maybe I'm naive and maybe I'm too hopeful, but I like to contemplate the idea of that someday in the future, America could feel like a country again. And that, you know, that it is possible for us as a nation to find things we can connect on, and things that we can agree on, despite our disagreements, right? Where can we connect? And one of the things that happened after the Civil War was there was this period of reunification, right? Reconstruction, where the country was trying to rebuild itself. And that reconstruction didn't include everybody. It included white men, basically. And so the question, we never answered the question. I mean, we tried to address some of it during the civil rights movement, but then we kind of brushed a lot of it aside. We never fully answered the question of how are we all of us, men, women, white, black, brown, whatever, how are we all going to have a piece of this country? How are we all going to function together? And we live in such a big place with so many different points of view. I really, the spirit of this film was about listening and allowing people to speak. And I think there's way too little of that right now. I think there's a lot of shouting. There's a lot of insisting on like the right point of view. There's not a lot of listening to each other. And that was something I really wanted to do with this film. But it also makes the film super uncomfortable because there are people in the movie who say all sorts of things that will offend lots of people. So.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with you. And like I was mentioning to you pre-show, that I've been really fortunate to do, well, again, today's number 117 live streams this year, and that's 222 overall since last May. And so I've talked to a wide variety of guests, literally from all over the world, who have viewpoints on all kinds of things. And sometimes, especially since these are live and I don't edit things once they're done, I don't really know what's going to come out of somebody sometimes. And I have to figure out, okay, as the host and the interviewer, do I follow them down this path and we talk about something that has nothing to do with their new album coming out, or do we just kind of brush that off to the side and let me steer them back to talking about their music and everything? And most of the time, I go down that path because I think it's important. I think it's something that needs to be talked about instead of, especially if it's on their mind, and it could be something that I don't agree with, but I will take the time to listen to them. And I've been trying to really work on my own skills with that, because it's really, really hard when you have someone who's like a polar opposite from you, 180 degrees away from maybe how I think about things, and not get upset, not want to shout, not want to start pointing fingers, and just kind of, well, just sit back and let them say their piece. As long as they will let me say my piece and then also hear me, then we can kind of have a dialogue and a conversation about things. But you're right. There's been so many of these people just kind of dug in on either side of whatever their issue is, and they don't want to come out of it.
Well, it's also, I mean, I think social media is part of the problem. It's easier to get clicks with things that are aggressive and hostile than it is to get clicks with things that are, moderate and understanding. So I do think the media landscape tends to breed nastiness and witty, anger. But I think one of the cool things about this film that I hope people will enjoy about it is it really does take you into places all over the country. You get to, be in these classrooms, be in people's living rooms, hear how different people think in a way about our history, about our past. And it's wacky the way people aren't telling the same story. And for me, I think one of the big revelations of making the film was in how poor my own education had been about, Black history or American history in general, all the things that I hadn't learned that are a fundamental part of who we are, right? So, I hope people enjoy that aspect of the film, like getting to be in these very intimate spaces with people they wouldn't normally get to meet.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And yeah, for people out there that haven't had a chance to watch it, Rachel's exactly right that there's so many different interviews and viewpoints from different age groups and different locations, and just it really gives you as a viewer enough information to kind of make you really hopefully think once you're done with the film, like, so what do I know and what do I need to kind of unpack and kind of question about things that I may have learned or picked up through my own family history or something like that. And most of us, I think, have had plenty of time to reflect in the last year and some change because of what's just been going on just in terms of society and the pandemic, that it could be something just on a personal level. Then you start looking into these social issues and historical issues and thinking, man, things really started to crack open last year. And are we going to continue to widen that crack in terms of learning more about, things and not just assuming that this is the way it's been for 50 plus years in terms of my age, and realizing, I need to kind of go back and kind of pick through the stuff a little bit better and not just say, well, it's fine. That's what I learned. Who cares? I'm just going to go over here and do what I've been doing. And like you were saying earlier, too many people want to do that. And maybe as a society, we tend to do that because it's extremely uncomfortable when you start digging into things that you thought was one way. And it turns out, you know what, maybe that's not actually right. And then you're like, well, it turns into this whole can of worms that people like, I don't want to deal with that can of worms. I want something that's nice and simple and neat and compact.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think I've never lived, you live in Seattle?
Yes.
What's it like in Seattle? In terms of integration? Like, is it mostly white? Is it like, what is that city like?
Gosh. It is.
I mean, do people live in separated neighborhoods? Do people live do people of different colors and backgrounds live together? How does that city function?
I would say nowadays, there's more of a mix of things in terms of different backgrounds and ethnicities, people living in the same neighborhood, especially in the city of Seattle proper. I was born in Seattle, but I was raised out in a suburb called Kirkland. And so for me, I can only speak to that piece of it, that every friend I had other than one were white. It was a suburb in the 70s. So I had my own cultural issues growing up that I didn't know that I was different than everybody until someone pointed it out to me. Through a racist comment or something of that nature. And even then, I didn't really understand it until I really because all my friends and all my neighbors are all white, so aren't just like you, and turns out I'm not. But having worked in Seattle for many years, then there used to be like a large Asian, Jewish, African American community all together in South Seattle. But then that has since brought in, there's a lot of Caucasian folks also living down there. There's Southeast Asians, there's Hispanic, and that's really kind of spread out all through the city. But having said that, we're also kind of known to be a fairly passive-aggressive city. So people that come and visit us, there's a term that they call about the Seattle freeze for people that move here, that it's hard to make friends, because on the surface you might say, oh, hi, how are you? And good morning. And then that's it. We just keep on walking. We won't really talk to you. We're not overly friendly. And I don't know if that has anything to do with race or anything. It just seems to be kind of more of the area. I was kind of guilty of that too until I met somebody who was from Missouri. And when he moved out here, he talks to everybody. And I thought, what are you doing? Why are you talking? He would literally talk to somebody coming off the bus, somebody he doesn't know at all. But then I kind of watched him and said, he puts himself out there and he's just generally being friendly to people. He's not looking for anything from somebody. And so then I started to kind of follow the same mindset and protocol that he does. And it was really interesting to kind of see how many people he could learn and meet. And even if I never see them again, just kind of having that part of my day. And maybe I actually learned something from somebody for, 2 minutes of talking to them instead of me just kind of keeping to my own lane and my own silo. So this city has some really, I don't want to say I'm skewed with this because I also worked like in nonprofit organizations for a while. I was also a teacher for a while as well here. And my family grew up in Chinatown International District here. And my uncle was a civil rights leader for many, many years. And he now has a wonderful high school named after him, which just happened last year.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so I have that aspect of, how I tend to look at things. And growing up, they talked about the melting pot and everything should be, all hunky-dory. We're all the same. Then you kind of realize we're the same maybe as human beings, but not ethnicity-wise, and our stories and our narratives are completely different. And that's where I think things got lost for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you live in a mostly white world, which many places in America are, I think it can be hard to recognize sometimes that you're in a mostly white world until all of a sudden somebody calls your attention to the fact that there are no people of color in the world that you're living in. And I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves why that's the case. It's not because people didn't want to live in those neighborhoods. It's because they weren't allowed to. And that aspect of how we live is not taught in schools generally. So maybe it is today. It wasn't when I was a kid. And part of the reason it's not taught is because after the war, we decided not to talk about the race problem, right? We just weren't going to talk about that anymore. And I think today, the questioning that's going on in the country, I ask myself, you know, like there's all this talk about critical race theory right now, right? And I think it's completely misunderstood in terms of what it actually is. But the notion that we shouldn't be talking about race in classrooms in a country that really is based on racial divisions in many ways and was built on them is just totally absurd. But it makes sense that you would grow up in basically like an all-white neighborhood and not really think about it until somebody says something horrible, right? Because those histories aren't being discussed.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. For me, it's interesting being on a kind of the flip side of this coin, because when I started working in South Seattle, I was working with predominantly students of color, and they thought I was one of them per se. I mean, like I grew up in Seattle, I understand their experiences and their narratives and everything else. And I would tell them, so I grew up in Kirkland. I grew up in a suburb which is near Microsoft. You know, to give them like a frame of reference, because a lot of those kids never leave the Rainier Valley. And it's like, oh no, you know, Mr. S, you know, he scraps. No, there's a lot of gang issues that I used to work with, a lot of gang involved kids. And I'm like, I've never been in a physical fight. That's not, I don't understand why you guys even do these things. Why do you try to shoot at each other? Why do you beat people up over a social media post? And they're like, oh, but you understand, right? You know, you're down with us. I'm kind of like, no, I don't understand this. Help educate me. You can be the teacher and I'll be the student and try to understand where you're coming from, because I did not grow up with this and I didn't grow up in this area, let alone from an ethnic standpoint of some of these other stories that have gone on. And we could talk about like with the internment camps, you know, my grandparents were in the internment camps. So that was very real. That's a fact that happened.
Is your family Japanese of origin?
Yes. And so for me, just even on that, you know, that timeline, watching your film, it kind of had some parallels to me about like, that would be like if someone said, you know what, that actually didn't happen, or that's not what it was about.
They don't talk about that history either. That's not a history. It's a very parallel, very similar situation. There's something I learned actually. It's in my raw footage. It's not in the movie. But I filmed this at Boston Latin, the school that I filmed at in Boston. I filmed these students who were part of this Asian Black coalition where they were trying to talk about Asian Black relations at the school. And they did this whole presentation. And one of the things they talked about in their presentation that I have not fact checked this, so I can't, but they did this in their presentation, that apparently in Los Angeles during the internment, they took the property of the Japanese people that they took and they stuck in the internment camps. They took their houses and they gave them to impoverished Black families. And this created major tensions for understandable reasons between these communities in Los Angeles, right? But again, that's not they, meaning local government, that had forcibly removed Japanese families from their homes. Since I grew up in LA, I never learned about that in school. Like, I mean, there are whole really kind of ugly aspects of our history that have to do with race that we simply don't talk about. And this is a film that's trying to look at the stuff we don't talk about and to get us to think about those silences in our own lives. I hope it works. I hope it does that for people. But it's not, I don't think the film's boring or like a slog or something. It's not like didactic, is it? I don't think it is.
No, not at all. For me, it was extremely fascinating to watch and learn, and again, kind of rethink the way I think about things. Yeah, what are those things that have been in the historical closet that even I'm aware of? Some things I'm not aware of because they just haven't been brought out. So it's like, what else is hiding back there behind that shelf?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, and one of the fun things that we did editorially with the film that I was proud of was the way we structured it. Because it really is told in these like little bubbles that go all over the country. So you have like a little thing in Washington, D.C., and then a little thing in Clinton, Mississippi, and then a thing in Louisiana. And so we were stringing together these stories, these little bubbles, to make a big a big picture, which I think helps the pacing too. It helps the film move.
It does. And real quick, Rachel, how are you on time? Do you still have a few more minutes, or do I need to kind of wrap things up?
I mean, I should go pretty soon. I should go.
Okay.
I have something pretty soon, but I have a few minutes.
And on cue, my platform decided to drop me off right when I asked that question. I'll make sure I kind of keep this going real quick, or wrap this up real quick.
Yeah.
That I think your film is extremely important for people to watch, and it's not boring whatsoever to anyone, no matter what you think or how much you want to unpack or not unpack things. If anyone's watching this right now. I see some people are asking right now on YouTube, where can you find this film? It's on Peacock. You can stream it on Peacock right now. So if you just do a quick search for Peacock, and that's affiliated with NBC. And but when you look back at it as a filmmaker and also as a person, wife, mom, is there any aspect of the film that you wish you had maybe done more of, with like a narrative that you thought we could have done more of it, or something that you figured that we could have left out or changed, or something?
No, I'm really happy with the movie. I worked on it for a really long time, and I made the movie I intended to make, and I thought about it for years, and I worked extremely hard on this film, and I'm very happy with it. I think a lot of people want a straight story these days. I mean, this is just to say it out loud, this is a very unusual film. Like, most movies today aren't getting made like this, because most movies are told in a straight line, and they're character based, because that's like, most movies are paid for by Netflix or Amazon or iTunes or Apple or whatever, and they want narratives, because those are really easy and they're way more commercial. I mean, they're fun, right? You can identify with the character. This film isn't doing that, and it's deliberately not doing that, because this isn't a story about one person. This isn't a story about one place. It's a story about the nation as a whole. A lot of people really like the teacher in Boston Latin, and that story between her and that young kid that starts the film and ends the film. And I do think that their relationship is really fascinating, but I'm really glad I didn't focus on that one story, because it's not about them. It's about the nation, and it's about all of us. And the film is laid, I mean, there's a huge diversity of like black, white, young, old, north, south in this movie. And I did that on purpose, because it's about all of us, right? I mean, it's told through my eyes. I'm the filmmaker, but I'm not trying to lay this out on one person. I did that on purpose.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did that on purpose. And again, for me as a viewer, for people out there that haven't seen this, hi Carlos, good of you to join us after the Temptation live stream, and Amanda as well. I like the fact that you had so many different viewpoints, and it wasn't trying to put your own perspective on it. It's like, here's all this information from all these different facts. And
well, I mean, I think my perspective's pretty clear in the movie. I mean, I don't think this is a film made by someone who doesn't have a point of view. And I think you can tell what my point of view is in the film, but I think it's a film that gives space to people. Like, this is a movie that requires the audience to actually think. It's not spoon feeding you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe I didn't word that right. To me, it kind of came across more that it's even said off camera. I think one of the students asked you, like, what do you think about this? And you can hear you talk about, what your viewpoint was really quickly in one of the cuts in one of the scenes. But to me, it was like, it wasn't, I've seen some documentaries where not only is it clear about what the filmmaker thinks, that's all they focus on. So it becomes extremely one-sided. And this film is not that at all. Maybe that's a better way of trying to say that. So people can really make up their own mind about things. And like you said earlier, trying to listen, trying to understand things, and not shout above the crowd, just trying to listen to what someone's saying, and then start figuring out, so where do I fit into this, and what do I want to bring to the table, and also what are those things that we've talked about right in the last 30 minutes that haven't been discussed, haven't been put into a textbook, there's all these things that are out there that, yeah, in many cases they're pretty freaking ugly. But if we don't know about it, then how are we going to learn to not repeat it or not to do it in present day, like right now in 2021?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be honest about who we are, and hopefully, if we are honest about who we are and we're understanding of each other, maybe there's a way forward where we can, as a country, start actually feeling like a country again.
Absolutely, that would be my hope, and I hope it's something that we can start taking steps toward. And as long as we're taking steps toward that, then there's some potential light at the end of the tunnel that actually happening. If we're not even taking steps, then it's like, well, we're just going to be happy with where we're at, and I'm not happy with where we're at. So
I don't think. We're in a really, really hard moment. That's got a lot of promise, but it's a really tough moment.
Yeah. So, well, Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time for talking with me today about your film. And again, for everybody out there, you can stream it on Peacock now. You don't have to wait for a month for it to come out and that kind of thing. So if you got all excited about the interview, which hopefully you did, because I think there's a great conversation about it, you can finish this and go right to it and start watching and formulate your own idea, or let me know what you thought about it, via social media. So real quick before I let you go, what are you working on next? Is there something else you're trying to gather footage for, or what's coming up?
Oh gosh, there are a couple things. I mean, in terms of independent projects, right now I'm focusing on climate issues. I want to make a climate movie.
Okay.
I've been looking at the electrical grid. That's my thing right now. I'm fascinated by these like crazy huge changes that need to happen really fast in our country, and how they're going to happen and who's working on it. And I'm looking there. I'm trying to find the right story for that right now.
You already have me intrigued.
Well, given the fact that you just experienced this massive 108-degree heat wave where you live, like, it's relevant. So
Absolutely. Well, Rachel, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Have a great afternoon, great day over there, and stay safe.
Thanks. Take care. Thanks for doing it. I really had fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.